The Friday Night Show.
And that, for me, is something that I've then looked at and gone, well, that is a problem with Sorkin's work. He can write whip-sharp dialogue, and he can clearly make a good-looking film and a well-produced film, but can he make a memorable film? And that's something that I'm struggling with. Plunge into the story a little bit. It's, as I say, it's about this essentially protest that took part of August 1968, going to Chicago, the Democratic National Convention, and protesting, and there was riots that happened around it, and it's about a certain group of people that were put on trial, basically, around it. And obviously, I always try and stay away from actually getting into the real politics behind these things, because I don't think that's for me to say. That's for everyone else to decide. But in terms of a film and how it works cinematically, there were some things I did think it did really well. Most chiefly of which are that the dialogue is whip sharp. Now that is obviously down to Aaron Sorkin. As I mentioned earlier, Sorkin is a writer first, and he can write. That's without question. When you look at his back catalogue of the likes of Social Network, Moneyball, and obviously the Steve Jobs film, Molly's Game, he can definitely write. And then obviously even going back further to A Few Good Men, he can actually write very good dialogue, and I believe Tarantino is one of the people as well who's come out and said he writes the best dialogue in the industry. Now, I think Tarantino writes some of the best dialogue in the industry. I think his interplay between characters is, you could get the likes of John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson reading out the Yellow Pages, and I think it would be really engaging if Tarantino made that. That's how I view him. But he seems to think the same about Sorkin. In fact, I believe he even said that Sorkin's The Social Network was the best film of the 10s in terms of writing and in terms of directing, with Fincher directing the film. He said it was his favourite film of the 2010s. I'm going to come on to The Social Network later because, spoiler alert, it's actually not my favourite David Fincher film at all. It's probably my least favourite David Fincher film, but we're going to touch on that in a bit. And I think that he does, in this film, though, have very good dialogue. It's very sharp, and it's one of its strongest points is that it does compel very nicely the story forward in how the characters interact between each other and actually how a courtroom drama should play out. It's got that tense and animosity vibe to it that comes across very nicely. The other one of the things I think goes really well for it is that it isn't over long. It's actually quite a good running time. It's only running at just over 2 hours, which for a real life story that's being portrayed on cinema, that's actually quite a tight running time. And particularly with the fact it's got an ensemble cast, which we're about to come on to. So to be able to give everyone enough kind of screen time is a challenge. And I appreciate that is something that you have to consider when it comes to a tight running time. And I think it had a really nice back and forth pace. It actually does just construct the story really well. So obviously starting in a present moment and then into the trial, but then it does cut back to what happens in the protests and in the riots and stuff, and it does layer that story well to actually bring the story forward in a positive manner and in a way that engages you. So I think there are things that are good about it. The thing is for me that there are problems to this film that I found in particular. One thing in particular being the ensemble cast. As I said, it's got a tight running time and I think it does a good job of that. However, the problem with ensemble casts is that while they are excellent, and they are, don't get me wrong, the cast in this film is phenomenal and they all do a really good job, but it does get a little bit lost in actually trying to allow everyone the adequate screen time. I mean, you look at the ensemble cast of this, you've got Sacha Baron Cohen, obviously is the one who's nominated for the best supporting actor in the Oscars. You've got Gordon Levitt, you've got Michael Keaton, who's a scene stealer, by the way. His little cameo bit is absolutely fantastic. Frank Langella, John Carroll Lynch, Eddie Redmayne, Mark Rylance, Jeremy Strong, Ben Shankman, and then you've also got Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, which, by the way, I love that because it's such an American name. I love how he's got the second after it. Like, you'd never get that in England, would you? But the second is a very, very American thing. But he's fantastic in it as well. The cast do a really good job. That's not the problem. But the thing is that when you've got so many actors, particularly heavyweight actors like this, all competing for a certain space, you almost don't know who to focus on and where the story's kind of going. It makes you sometimes think, would this have been better off as a short mini-series or a short little drama series or something on HBO? I don't know. But for me, it did get a little bit lost in that fact that the ensemble cast was so involved. But not involved enough to actually maybe get your actual your emotional investment into it. The biggest problem with me for this film, and this is what I was saying about coming onto Sorkin films, is that for me it's ultimately forgettable, and that is the biggest flaw, because for me, if you want a film obviously to work, it needs to be something that's quite memorable. And I actually, when I watched this, so I watched it when it came out, roughly, a week or two after it came out. So that would have been end of October, start of November. It's not that long ago. And I had to go and really look at the plot again. I mean, I knew it was about a riot. I knew it was about a courtroom drama. But if you asked me what the plot points were, I would never have been able to answer them, sorry. I'd have had to have gone and checked them again. And then that made me start thinking, and I started thinking about Sorkin as a director particularly. And I thought it's something that's actually slightly characteristic of Sorkin, and that's obviously a shame and a bit of a bad thing, because I look at his back catalogue, and I particularly look at things like The Social Network and Molly's Game, and I find them ultimately forgettable. Now, as I said earlier, I touched on The Social Network, and I say it's David Fincher's probably least favourite film of mine, and yet it still has the overtones of the cold, sort of moody drama that he does very well. It still has the foreboding atmosphere. It's still got that kind of David Fincher aesthetic. And it's got a very memorable scene with, who was it? It's Andrew Garfield going absolutely apeshit on on Jesse Eisenberg's computer. It's got moments like that. But if someone came to me and then said, all right, so what's that story about? I could say to you it's about the birth of Facebook, and I could say to you that, it's about how the relationship dissolved, but I couldn't tell you how that film played out. I couldn't say, so obviously this happened, and then it grew to that, and then they went there. I couldn't even boil it down to a simple premise. And that's what started me thinking. I watched Molly's Game as well, and that's his directorial debut, and it was good. I enjoyed it. It came out in 2017. And I enjoyed it, but I then thought back to it. I thought, I know it was about gambling and poker, I think, and Jessica Chastain's in it, and she was very good. But I was like, but actually, what was the film about? And Idris Elba, he was class, but what was the actual plot points of the film? And I couldn't tell you. And that for me is something that I've then looked at and gone, well, that is a problem with Sorkin's work. He can write whip-sharp dialogue. And he can clearly make a good-looking film and a well-produced film, but can he make a memorable film? And that's something that I'm struggling with. The one flaw in this plan that I'm saying to you here is I haven't seen Steve Jobs, so I can't comment on that. But I have seen Moneyball, and Moneyball is fantastic. Now, he wrote that and didn't direct it. And he also co-wrote it with Stephen Zellane, and he's got a good back catalogue as well. But Moneyball is fantastic, and it's so good that I could even say that my dad, who has absolutely no interest in baseball, and the film is about baseball and about statistics and stuff to do with baseball players, he was absolutely drawn into this film, and he watched it by himself in a cinema when it came out. I think he was on the Isle of Man randomly, something to do with work, I don't know. But he was there and he watched it, and I've watched it since, and it is a really good film. So what I would say from that, I suppose, is what I'm trying to come to, is that Sorkin can write. He can definitely write, but can he direct? I'm not sure. And I think that does all boil down to the fact that sometimes, writers who are turned writer-directors, can they separate themselves from the writing and the direction? And I'm not sure that they always can. A notable one for me is also Brian Hegland, who wrote LA Confidential and then went on to make something like, for example, a recent film, which is the biopic about the Cray twins, what was it called, Legend. He directed that and wrote that, and it was a good film, but it was a little bit caricature, wasn't it, I suppose, of the Cray twins with Tom Hardy playing the two roles. It was fun, it was good, but it was meant to be a gritty crime Cray twin drama, and it did boil into a bit of caricature by the end of it, I'd say. So that's kind of how I'd summarise it up. It's not a bad film. It's very timely. It shows the power of protest and how still today that is something that's being fought over and that still needs maybe change, and it does make it an important film. It just doesn't make it a memorable one. So I would make it a 3-star film, which if people have seen on Instagram, I've now actually put the rating system up on the Instagram channel, because there is now an Instagram TV channel of ours with a couple of videos on, and there's a film review section. I boiled it down into there, and the 3 stars basically says entertaining, solidly made, enjoyable, just not mind-blowing emoji, because I put a mind-blowing emoji instead of writing mind-blowing. And I think that absolutely sums it up to a T. So that's the Trial of Chicago 7 for me.
Okay, interesting. It's actually the first one that you've spoken about that I've also watched. So that's quite
excellent.
Nice. Yeah, so I have watched that one, and I did enjoy it, and I thought it was really good. But yeah, I think you're probably right. I think that with regards to the rating, I would probably agree with it. I do look at it and think to myself, okay, what was the storyline? How did it pan out? And yeah, you're right. And then actually, when you do look at those other films that you've mentioned there, when you were saying that, I was like, you are so right. Like, I can't. I look at those and think, wait, what was that about? What? Just like, I completely
which ones
agree.
of them have you seen? Of those ones, like, do you remember?
Molly's Game, and
and
The Social Network. I've watched that as well. I've seen Moneyball, and I really enjoyed that, and I thought that was really good. But yeah, the ones that you mentioned there, I have watched, and now that you've said that, I do think, at the time I thought they were good, but I couldn't tell you what they were about now. So, yeah,
it's one of those things. It's hard. You suddenly go through it and you pin through it and you go, Social Network. I'm amazed how big it's become. Like, people absolutely love that film, and that's fine. Like, it was a good film. I enjoyed it, but I think for me, what I enjoyed most about it was David Fincher.
Yeah.
The David Fincher aspects of that film. It was like Gone Girl, but obviously about cyber community. And obviously it worked well because Sorkin wrote it and he directed it, but it's still, ultimately, I was like, does it really do anything for me, and can I remember it? And I go, not really. I can tell you it's about the birth of Facebook. I can tell you it's about that, and I can tell you there's some good performances in it. Can I tell you much more than that? Not really.
The Friday Night Show with Bradshaw and Ives.